So by way of introduction, my name is Dan Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Neurodiversity in Business. As most people know, we're a charity set up in order to help organisations move forward their journey towards neuro-inclusive workplaces. We have been running a series of monthly events for our corporate members. And I've been really looking forward to this one because the three people on our panel today are personally and individually heroes of mine. And they've just done such amazing work in the ND space for many years. And particularly importantly, and this is an area that I genuinely feel corporates are not terribly good at, is understanding that diversity within the neurodiversity spectrum and why intersectionality plays to this topic incredibly well. Now, they will express that far more eloquently than I just did. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand across to them in a second. They can spend a minute or two introducing themselves, and then we'll give the floor to Atif, who will explain a bit more about the format of today. So in terms of the kind of structure for today, we thought that the best value that our members would get from this would actually be if we had a fairly relaxed fireside chat with the three panelists. So that will occupy a fair chunk of the time. And then we have the Q&A element right at the end, which again is informal, it's not fixed. Now, we also appreciate that this crosses over everyone's lunch hour, etc. So there's no expectation that we'll go all the way until 1:30. We will try and give you some time off at the end if you need to finish your sandwich or kind of attend to yourself before your next meeting. Please do, let's make this interactive. So please keep throwing questions into the Q&A and I'll do my best to look at them. And look, I'd like to let the panelists introduce themselves. So I'll throw it to you first of all, Atif. Welcome and thank you for your time. You're on mute, Atif.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for listening and giving up their lunch hour or part of it to be with us today. We're really grateful for that. My name's Atif. I hope I've had the pleasure of knowing some of the people in this chat, I can see. And I am one of the founders of DNA, Diversity and Ability, which I'm sure is known to a lot of folks, but just in case it's not, it's a social enterprise designed to get more disabled and neurodiverse people involved in teaching, training, mentoring, and assistive technology in the workplace and higher education.
Thanks, Atif. It's amazing to have you here. Now we'll go across to Char. Please feel free to introduce yourself, Char.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Char Bailey. I use she and her pronouns. For anybody who needs a visual description, I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I'm a light-skinned woman of colour. I have brown curly hair that sits on my shoulders, and I'm sat in a white and brown space with plants around me. I've recently become a director for Birmingham Pride. I also work with UK Black Pride. I am a diagnosed autistic lesbian, and it's taken me a long time to be proud to say that. And I'm looking forward to delving into this conversation with Marcia and Atif. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. And on to you, Marcia. Welcome.
So good afternoon, everybody. And I will follow on from Char in saying that I'm a woman of colour, and I've been working within the neurodiverse space for a long time. I've been working in education and been advocating for the last 30 years. I would say I'm an independent advocate and dyslexic champion, and I'm dyslexic and neurodiverse, probably some ADHD traits, definitely. But I'm just really passionate to talk about my lived experience and also about representation of neurodiversity and talking about race within that. As I said, as a Black woman, I've got a headscarf on with a bit of afro at the top, sticking out with big African print earrings and a afro, I guess, print wrap. And that just really identifies who I am as a person. So thank you very much. And I look forward to engaging with you all today.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll throw it across to Atif. We've got some really interesting topics to discuss. So Atif, why don't you lead from here?
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, and forgive me, I forgot to do my audio description. So I'm a brown man with a big peppered beard and a big smile. Yeah, and I'm sitting there talking to you wearing glasses. So I'm going to take us all on a bit of a journey, I suppose, and share the journey. And I'm really grateful, as I said, to Char and to Marcia for sharing their journey. These are conversations about lived experiences. They are realities. They're not easy to talk about because a lot of emotional labor has to go into this work, you know, and it's not easy work in itself. And sometimes it's very difficult to be the diversity within a diversity, to have to tell a story to show that there's a lot more work for folks to do. And sometimes it shouldn't be so hard, but often it is. So we wanted to really share this space to say, look, that we do need an intersectional understanding of neurodiversity. It's always been needed. It's not a thing that's fashionable to talk about, but really it's about relevance. It's about acceptance. It's about welcomes. And it's about making sure that we're talking about these things early to make it less hard for the people who come after us. And that's tough work, but that's really what we want to do. So I think, you know, that without an intersectional understanding of the barriers of neurodiversity, then we're not going to have a relevant understanding of the barriers in neurodiversity. You know, that class, migration, poverty, race, shame, and the healing, it all plays a deep role to understand those things. And without understanding those things, we're not going to get into the places of safety or even the places of innovation that we need to have, that unlocks the talent and the sense of justice that we all deserve. So it's big stuff. It is. It's not meant to be just easy, but it's meant to be kind at least. And we've got to figure out how we get there. And that's going to take a lot of folks digging in deep to see where their power is, where they can say, look, they're an advocate for neurodiversity, but they got to do that as kids. And there are a lot of people facing learning isolation in the workplace today that don't necessarily have a diagnosis, but have a reality that really leaves them isolated. And there are a lot of folks who don't feel they're part of a neurodiversity conversation because they're not part of a social capital in their childhoods or in their communities to even talk about those things. Yet the reality and the impact of that isolation is deep, embedded into their lives. So how do we take these kind of spaces to say, look, we're losing a lot of good folks because the current way of talking about neurodiversity has a long way to go to be more mature and to understand that the impact, rather than just the label, is the work we've got to do, and that not everybody is able to access the label. It's not easy, but we will get there, and we are going to look at this work in the lenses of class and migration and poverty as we take you guys in the conversation with us. So I'm really going to just sort of pause there for a minute and ask some questions to Char and to Marcia and to you as an audience. And I really hope you dig in and find the courage to ask questions of us. You know, provocations are important, right? They are, because they're acts of solidarity, they're acts of allyship, they're acts of curiosity, but they're also acts of humility, of saying we don't know this stuff easily, we haven't experienced that stuff, or we may be in positions of power. So what can we do to welcome people who find these kind of conversations really hard? And what do we lose when those folks aren't in these conversations? So I hope that's a way of sort of welcoming you all and making it meaningful. I'm really going to say some questions, and I think I would love to sort of really hear what folks think, really. Char, if I may ask you to start with, a question is, what do you mean, or what do you think we mean of diversity in diversity? What does that mean for you? And I'm quite interested in hearing from your experience, as well as the role that you do at Birmingham Pride.
Yeah, thank you for that, because, and can I just check everyone can hear me okay? I did get a note from Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte, to say that the audio was a bit tricky earlier. Is it okay now?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Perfect. I really feel seen when I'm asked a question like this, because everything that is intersectional about me are all of the things that I used to believe were my limitations. So my brown skin was a limitation. My lesbian identity was a limitation, that the fact that I assigned female at birth and I exist in this woman's body was a limitation. And so at different points throughout my life and my career, I've had to choose which part of my intersectionality I'm going to fight for or I'm going to lead with. In which spaces do I have to code switch enough so that I can be safe and palatable and welcomed? Because sometimes it's great to be a member of the LGBT community, but being a neurodiverse one, well, that's a little bit iffy. And sometimes it's great for me to be welcomed as a South Asian person in some spaces, but the Black part of me, well, that's not so welcome. So I think when I talk about diversity in any sense, I'm talking about not just about tolerating different or acknowledging that people are different, but embracing difference, celebrating difference, nurturing difference. And it matters because I matter, because I exist, because people who have intersections that cross over have an unparamounted amount of minority stress. There are so many different barriers and challenges that come with each different minority group and intersection. Even, you know, some people won't be able to understand my accent because I'm from Wolverhampton. I'm from one of the most working class towns, you know, it's called the Black Country. So even having to think about the way I articulate myself in certain spaces because of that intersection is a barrier. And if we don't acknowledge this, if we don't talk about it, if we don't embrace people, then we continue to think that difference is synonymous with worse, that difference is synonymous with problematic. And hey, I'm not worse and I'm not problematic. I just have needs that exist. I'm allowed to be vulnerable. And for me to be able to thrive at work, somebody has to see all of me, not just this Black woman or this lesbian or this neurodiverse person, but this whole being who has feelings and skills and talents and things that we have to embrace as organizations and as individuals. And so for me, it's taken a long time to embrace those things within myself. So asking the world to embrace them is a huge question, but I'm no longer frightened to ask that. So for me, that's what I mean when I talk about diversity within neurodiversity, and that's why it's important.
Right. And very touching, Char. Thank you. Found that very moving. Marcia, so I'm going to ask the same question of you, and feel free to express it from your side of the work that you do, which is impressive as an advocate for so many marginalized young people who aren't getting support, but also your own experiences, however it feels to you. It's all good. So I want to ask you, Marcia, you know, in terms of this title, a diversity within diversity, and I'm conscious we're talking about neurodiversity, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I've thought about it many times, and it leaves me with the thought of diversity. And when I think about diversity, I remember being at school. So for me, the school and workplace feel very similar in lots of ways. And when I think of diversity in school, I think about belonging, I think about culture, I think about equality. And doing that transition from the education to school, the same things have appeared, the same things of feeling like I don't belong and feel misunderstood. I feel visible but invisible. I can't have a bad hair day. Is it going to be about my afro or is it going to be about something else? You know, my neurodiversity. I can't have those sayings with it being associated with something. So I can't have a bad day, or it's going to be about my reading and writing. So it's so complex in terms of when we're talking about intersectionality and feeling like you belong in a place that you're meant to be nurtured, developed. You talked about innovation, being able to be my authentic self. It can be really hard, and I've had to work on that. I've had to do the inner work in myself when there's been trauma. But what I find within our institutional organisations, are they doing that work? Are they doing the inner work? And still I feel croaky when I'm saying it because it's so still real for me and still so raw, because I see it day to day in my job working to support and empower parents who have SEND or special educational needs within their family or their children. And yet we're still asking these questions around diversity, accessibility, inclusivity. It's still being asked. And, you know, I've been in this field for 30 years and you can add more to that to my age, and I'm still asking those questions. I have come through to be able to find my voice, but many of us within the workplace are masking, feeling traumatized, not feeling good enough, not feeling they're able to have a voice, scared to lose their jobs. That's real. Performance management, that's real. And some of those intersectionalities, when I was a young child, my grandmother told me I had to work twice as hard. And that was preparing me, and I was about 5 or 6, telling me I had to work twice as hard. So that was the resilience element I needed to, because the color of my skin may limit me, the barriers. Then I'm a woman. There's lots of things I see around that as a young girl going into my adulthood, the glass ceilings, having to be fighting for equality. Then comes neurodiversity. I'm thinking, is this, you know, what's happening here? And there's another barrier. And it's a very confusing and complex thing. Char really articulated it really well in her journey. But yet Char and I have come from different places, but still saying the same things. We don't want to just have representation, and I don't want to be a tick box, but yet, if we're talking about diversity, why am I talking about a tick box or tokenism? I shouldn't feel that. I should be enough to feel that I'm there because I'm worthy of being there, because I've got the talent. And that's the work we need to do. We need to be focused on the talent. It's no good just looking at stats and saying that's what we've got to be target driven by the stats. Stats are not people. They tell part of the story, but there's much more on that. So I will say that for now, but that's my element of looking at neurodiversity and just bringing a different little bit of angle and my childhood to that, and the workplace and our schooling system in terms of measuring our talents and not coming from a work-based approach. And I'm not even talking about race there. Okay.
That's all right. It's very difficult to have this conversation in a meaningful place without talking about those structures, right? And it is about those structures, the things that make it so much harder for some people to participate. And poverty is going to be, regardless of race, poverty will play a role in that psychological safety, that sense of trauma.
100%.
But yeah, and thank you for sharing. And so both of you for doing it so deeply. I also, I mean, I'm a dyslexic learner who struggled to school and grew up in a fairly famous rough council estate that I didn't know how rough it was, because it was so big. It was huge. It's one of the biggest council estates in the country. You could walk for 20 minutes and still be in it. And so I actually didn't see London until I was like 15, even though I grew up in London, you know. And that kind of institutionalization of place can be quite difficult. But our families as migrants, they're survivors. They come, they survive, but a generation after them must grow and build. But how do we do that? It's one thing to say it, but how do we do that? I'm sort of thinking about something as well about my own childhood, and I wonder, I'm throwing this out not just to the three of us, but also to everyone listening now, people of color. I remember, I think somewhere between sort of 12 and 14, and I suspect to most of my friends have had the same conversation with somebody who's their guardian or a parent. You know, 4 words, you know, somewhere between that age of 12 and 14, 4 words, you must do more. You know that moment? And it could be almost like, and if that resonates to those listening and to 2 of you, you must do more. And it's not like intended to be the end of your childhood, of course not. But it's that recognition, yeah, that things are structurally outside are not easy. They're different for us. They're different for our parents, and they'll probably be different for our grandchildren, but hopefully not. But it's there. So in that recognition, I suppose our question I have is, look, when you have to do more in a workplace to get further in the workplace, then you're hardwired to share less in that same workplace. Because for you, it's a question of survival, it's a question of income. So if there's really good HR programs talk about neurodiversity, then that's brilliant. But if those programs look like young white men who are talking about IT skills and the program is recruiting for young white men and IT skills, then that's not an autism program. It's not even a neurodiversity program. It's a good program perhaps for young white men and IT skills. So the conversation is, what does neurodiversity look like for people who are women, who are brown people, who just don't do IT or just not interested in it? What does it look like for people who don't always feel safe to talk about it, because currently people like them are not talking about it in that workplace? It's a real challenge, right? But I guess that's the work we're trying to do here. So it's a tough challenge for everybody, because it's also a tough challenge for the corporates and if not, especially small, medium enterprises who really get left out of the picture, and yet they make 92% of the UK economy. It's a tough challenge for a lot of HR directors who want to do more, but often they're trapped in silos. And these silos are about racism when racism is important to talk about. They're about disability when disability is important to talk about. And they're about gender pay, misogyny and homophobia when those things are important to talk about. I wonder to both of you, and I have a question about, I suppose, do you think the silos are helping move the conversation along? Or do you wonder if, or feel they may be preventing some of the realities that need to be talked about to be shared? I wanted to ask that question really of you, Char, and of you, Marcia. And the audience as well, actually, to throw in. Please throw in your thoughts on that as well. Can I ask Char what your thoughts are on that?
I think whenever we talk about diversity, intersectionality, neurodiversity, business, it's really important that we apply nuance. I'm really good at black and white thinking. It's one of my autistic special skills. I can really be decisive and say this and this exists. But I think when we're talking about a journey to understanding, when we're talking about human beings, we need to acknowledge and accept that, you know, two things can be true at the same time. We haven't cracked, we haven't made it work yet. There is no magic answer yet. And the only way that we can continue to show that we care is to continue to be innovative and decisive and implement things that might make a difference. I don't think anybody in the panel or in the audience can say, hey, this is the strategy that works, do this, and everyone will feel included and the world will be a much better place. But what I think is important is that we stay curious, we stay compassionate, we keep acknowledging and accepting that not everything is going to work, but we still try those things. So I think perhaps it's a diplomatic answer, but I think yes, there is a place for it, but there's also a place for the more holistic, human-natured, connecting work that is, you know, imperative and that we all sort of let go of during the panna cotta panoramic and have, you know, just about eased back into being connected to each other. So yes and no.
Okay. Yeah. Marcia?
Yeah, I'm going to follow on for that. So I might not give the right answers to it, but obviously there's no right answer, but just answering the question because I can go off a little bit. So I've just got a bit of a disclaimer. I did my first degree in information science. So I didn't get a look in the IT world, and I did things like looking at firewalls, database, you know, information analysts, never got a look in. So already I was thinking, you know, I didn't get my foot in the door. Was that because I was a woman? Was it because I was Black? Was it because I was neurodiverse? But I just thought I'd say that because you talked about IT, and I had a passion for IT before I went into education. So that's my disclaimer. But I mentioned this before when we had a chat previously, and it's about, for me, and maybe this is where I'm not going to answer the question, but it feels right for me that we've got to do the inner work. I've had to do the inner work to recover, heal, restore myself. And I think companies and organizations need to be open to doing that inner work. It's no good having what I mentioned about this tick box and this glossary look of a diversity, and this is what it is, and these are the stats. You've got to do a bit more than that. You've got to dig a bit deeper to really have some understanding of the people you're working with. And great, we've got lots of groups, but people get burnt out in these groups because you're not investing the money. And we don't want to talk about money, but there is an element that maybe some things don't have a budget. I don't know. I'm not in the purse strings of people, but I just feel like you see a turnover of people doing this genuine work of wanting to make change, of wanting to have these conversations, but they don't last because there's no investment, and it doesn't get to the top. So for me, just like I've had to, because of the systematic barriers and all of those other things that I've had to work through because I was told I wasn't good enough, is that we have to do the inner work, and you have to ask the questions, you have to reach the people. You need to do that work, and that starts through the leadership. It really does. I think that's kind of my take on it, but I know I'm probably not answering the question, so please come back to me on it. But I just feel there needs to be a real genuine investment, and you know, Char talks about that curiosity and all of those things. They really need to be at the forefront of everything, and that intersectionality framework, you know, Char and I have a connection, that we've got a heritage that we share, but we've got different backgrounds. And sometimes, you know, I was making a joke that, you know, people might recognize us because we've got the same surnames, but they might look at our hairstyles and think we've got both afros. But all of those things still makes us unique and different. So I just wanted to put that there, and I hope it has some kind of resonance and makes some kind of sense. But I'm still trying to make sense of that whole sense of being belonging, and the cultures that I belong to, they're all different, but they're all relatable. And, you know, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. It's always lovely. Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, belonging is probably the key conversation, right? And it's a key part of it. It's a word that's been used a lot. And it's said often, I think, with the grace it deserves, do you know? But often I wonder if sometimes it's been capitalized on. It's a bit like intersectionality in a reactive way, you know. And I think that this is really where power lives, and what power might do when it says, well, we need to be talking about it because people are talking about it, or we need to talk about it because our competitors are talking about it, or we just need to talk about it because it's teaching us something. And I want it always to be the last, but I don't know if it is. And I suppose it boils down to, you know, those conversations that people often have about culture and identity. But so many organizations that are listening today, it's not easy for them as well, because they're in reactive environments, fast-moving reactive environments as well. HR directors with new changes and legislation and such. But then I wonder sometimes, well, we can anticipate. We can be a big organization. We can anticipate that many people will be hiding differences because they're not safe yet. We can anticipate that it's our role to recognize how we make those invitations felt. And we can recognize perhaps that it's not for everybody to do the emotional labor to come forward about what they need, because then it's not an invitation, it's an imposition. You know? So what do we do? Well, we need to put out a stall to say, look, this is what our welcome at this place looks like. We are this organization, and we anticipate it's hard to talk about these differences, but we welcome you through it. And we recognize the diversity of thought only makes us stronger. It's the diversity of thought, the innovation, and the readiness for the civil society we want our children and our organizations to thrive in. It's doable. Absolutely. It just takes a lot of brave and bold work. But I guess what we're saying here is, for some folks, that's just harder than others because of the conversations we're having, the lack of belonging or the inaccess to social capital and things. But I wonder, to both of you, is I guess I've been working in the field of neurodiversity since, well, it feels like a long time, but since 2001. But in a way, I've been working in it the day I was born. Or the day I, come to realize how much was expected of me to be a good reader, and to be good at spelling, and to realize my identity was going to be attached to that, whether I wanted it or not. So, but I do wonder, neurodiversity has never had a stronger time of things in the workplace. I mean, it's not where it should be, of course. But I wonder, what is it you feel has made it so popular over the last, say, 2 to 3 years?
I just will chip in a little bit. I think there's been that whole thing, which Judy Singer did coin that the term neurodiversity, but this whole celebratory model to celebrate, to embrace from the sort of the beginnings of autism, in terms of talking about autism and whether it's, you know, disorder, condition, whatever, how you want to refer it, but that spectrum of, you know, differences and how the neurological brain works. It comes from that element of wanting to celebrate, to embrace, and to be identified and be belonging again, I guess. So that's one of the aspects I feel why that's come about. But I've embraced it because it makes me feel like I'm worthy of having this brain that makes me think a little bit different. So I just stop there and see what Char's take on it, but that's a little element of where I think it's coming from, definitely from a celebratory model, and that we want to embrace that. And it does come under the Equality Act about the way those differences, but also we just need to look at the fact that we've got to change the system in terms of how we recruit, but also how we find talent. Because one of the things that I learned in my, you know, later on in life, that my neurodiversity is not based on intelligence, but yet I was told I was a D grade student. So we still have that in the way we assess and recruit, and we need to look at that as well. So I'll just stop there, but that's just some of my thinking. It's just sometimes random, and I think because of my neurodiversity, I sort of see a big picture for a while and I go for it, and then I have to draw myself back. So I hope you're with me, some of the audience, because my brain does do that sometimes. It likes to sort of see the end picture of things, and I have to bring you with me, or I'll have to go back.
I'm sure they're with you, Marcia. I am, for sure. Sure.
It's literally a privilege to be taken on your journey, Marcia. Like, any time you want to go, I am here and ready to listen. Brilliant listening to you. Thank you. I think for me, I work in this activist space, if you like, and so I'm trigger warning as well, because I want to talk about some things that might, you know, be activating for people. But you know, in the last few years, we saw George Floyd's murder, and the Black Lives Matter movement was, you know, kickstarted, and suddenly, you know, although that movement had existed a long time before, suddenly people, you know, really cared about anti-racism, not just racism, they cared about anti-racism, and they really started to care about this idea of intersectionality. They really started to care about minorities, people. And whether that was real care or whether it was, you know, placating the wider view and pretending to care, but people started to stand up for, you know, what would previously be seen as the little guy, or, you know, help. People wanted to help. And so I think that with that has come an influx of, you know, neurodivergence. What is neurodivergent? If you type neurodivergent into, you know, Google or the dictionary, it still comes up with a little red squiggle underneath it. You know, we're still a spelling mistake. And so I think things like that really help to unite communities. You know, we saw groups of people coming together, and a lot of those people, you know, we're talking about diversity and neurodivergence. Well, guess what? A lot of brown people are neurodivergent. A lot of gay people are neurodivergent. You know, we exist within these minorities. So I think it's one of those conversations for me that it's, you know, it's about time that it's come to the forefront. It's always been existed, but people just needed that push, I'd say, to start backing it and to start really delving into, you know, what it means and who does it apply to, and who is this affecting. And I think the mindset has shifted globally to, you know, how can we help? What can we do? And I'm really proud to be a part of that, although there is that shame that it had to be, you know, we had to get to that point for people to start to care. If that makes sense.
It does.
Absolutely. I have I mean, observations I felt as well are very much similar to yourselves, for both of you. The idea that we talk about talent as well, but talent, you know, talent can live here, but the idea that trauma lives all the way over there somewhere probably isn't helpful. And the idea that, because in truth, this talent and this trauma, they're symbiotic. It may well be informing each other. They may well be living much closer. In fact, I think they often are much closer than anyone realizes. And some of the best of that talent has come out because of a lived experience, because of an isolation. I don't know if DNA would exist without some of the challenges I faced in my childhood. In fact, I'm pretty convinced there's so much goodness here in all the staff that's in it and the people and their experiences, but it's very much the company I needed when I was younger, you know? And so the idea that talent and trauma live so far apart is probably the misnomer that we've got to break, you know? It's probably the thing that we've got to say is, how do we get people into those spaces where they're sharing these differences because they want to, not because they have to? That it's not about job protection, which is actually a mental health loss, but rather excitement and about participation. And that's really tough work to do. It's hard work, as I said, for a lot of HR directors to know how to navigate. But we're at a good space right now because part of these conversations can lead to that maturity and that strength, providing their support and psychological safety for people there. I think you guys have embodied that really well. I've got a whole bunch more questions to ask as well, but I want to pause for a second because I know we're going to ask questions to the audience as well, and the audience will ask questions back to us as well. But I wondered first is, Char, to you and to Marcia, do you have questions that you would like to ask of us, do you know, the three of us, before we go to an audience?
Yes, I do actually. I have a question for both of you because full transparency, I am a huge fan of both of you and your work. So I absolutely have a plethora of questions, but I have just got one question for you each. So I'll let you decide who wants to be first in the very gentle firing line. Sure,
great. This is great.
Okay, I'll go to you first, Atif. My question for you is, you know, I am a fan of your work because I see you go into organizations, meeting people, and you are being the change, if you like. You embody that daily with your interactions. And so I think you're the best person to give me the insider info on, are there examples of people or organizations that you know that are getting it right now? We've talked a lot about how people get it wrong, but can you tell us a little bit about those who are getting it right, and maybe give us a bit of insight in how they're getting it right and what they've done to get there?
Yeah, sure. That's a lovely question. Thank you, Char.
Keep it positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should, you know. Yeah, I think, look, it starts with that curiosity, as I've said, but the critical part of it is the humility. You know, without that, we don't have it. What we have is a perception of something, or performance politics that navigates around a calendar. You know, an organization showing things through what I guess is, you know, CSRs and stuff like that, and marketing. Of course, there's a sea of that, but there are folks who are saying, look, we don't know this. We've asked this. We've worked with an organization. I'll probably use George Floyd as an example. Of course, the world was shocked and it was painful, but seeing an organization approach us and to talk about this and say, look, we started this because we felt anti-racism was important. We feel that we need to embody that. We feel, yeah. But it's also recognizing they're an organization that historically made its fortune through those structures, and acknowledging that is in itself can be an act of solidarity. So I think that's a good example of something that says we need to offer this humility. One of the things that I found with this organization was it had said, look, a lot of Black people haven't shown up to the events that we're doing, and we're putting on these events to talk about, you know, and we've got just a lot of white people coming. And I said, well, okay, so there's something to acknowledge. And how do we sit with that? How do we recognize that so many white people were shocked at the murder of George Floyd, but Black people were not shocked? They were hurt, but they were not shocked. So how do we get to a space where everyone can recognize, actually, you need to learn to feel this hurt too, because this hurt hurts your children. It hurts the children who aren't yet born in the world that they deserve to live in, be they Black or white. And how do we sit with that pain? And how do we recognize this isn't a moment? This is a 400-year-old conversation. And it shouldn't take someone to be painfully killed in order to have that conversation. So it's really tough, but there are examples. Yes, there needs to be more. I was going to say there's so many, but actually I won't say that there isn't. But there are examples of organizations, and they're quite some of them are really big. We've had the privilege of working with them to say, look, yeah, we want to get this right. We want to not say we don't have many disabled people here. We acknowledge we probably got tons. They're just not telling us. And that sits on our shoulders. not on theirs. What can we do? And so we're seeing that more and more. And I think it's the courage of those conversations and the conviction where people are prepared in leadership to relinquish some power rather than to control the perimeters of it, are happening in pockets, and it just needs to happen more. So yeah, absolutely, because we're going to face a Black woman who wants to be paid equally, who cares about climate urgency, who may be a wheelchair user, and why wouldn't we? And if she happens to be gay, straight, or not, deciding what that needs to be defined by somebody else, well, absolutely embrace it. But how do we get organizations to move away from those silos? And I think that's the work to do. But I promise you, there are examples of that for sure with organizations we're privileged to work with. I would like to see more corporates following the leaning and the learning they can do from the third sector. But I'd also like to see the third sector say, what can we do to tell our stories to wider circles that employ more?
Atif, you really are a master at answering the question, but also planting seeds for thought as well. Like my brain, I can feel like if my brain was an extension of my hair right now, that's what my thoughts look like just crawling with so much. Thank you for taking the time to really delve into that. Is it okay if I ask you a question, Marcia?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, what can I say from that? But
well, the question that I actually had for you was a bit different.
Okay,
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because you've worked in this, you've worked in education for 30 years. You have all of that experience, and it takes a lot to keep advocating for others, to keep fighting for others when you also have your own needs. So I wanted to ask you, what's been your biggest barrier, Ari, your needs and accessibility in work, and how has your role been adapted in order for you to thrive? And was that something that came about because the organisation said, "Oh, hi, here, Marcia, we're going to give you this," or was it something that you had to fight and advocate for? I'm just interested to know your journey into that.
And that's a really good question, because I know it's come up in the chat about the support as well. Where do I begin? Because I still start from the school journey of fighting, and then going into the workplace, disclosing from diagnosis of being dyslexic at 16. So it's always been a bit of a fight, but my growth has changed and my mindset has changed. So that has really helped, because I did, which I say we need to do within the organizations, do the inner work. So I had to heal myself from all of the traumas. Like Atif, we have a really shared common thing, is that we selectively muted as children because we couldn't express no more to what was happening in our, in our environments, and that I'm particularly meaning in the school environment. So at first, because from a cultural perspective, you don't talk your business, you don't do these things, you listen to authority. So there's so many complexities in that in itself. Then I've got to advocate for myself, because if I don't, how am I going to get on? And that's what I had to learn when I was in the education system. I had to advocate. It almost sounds terrible to say it, but it's almost like I had to hack the system. And I have to be mindful when I say that, because, I don't hack systems, but literally I had to hack the education system, which is only 100 years old in terms of, and we're still following, Victorian kind of rules and acts and stuff like that. So we're not up to date. So that's one thing. But now when we move into the workplace, I've had to carry all of those, I call my shopping bags, but I've had to let them go to be able to advocate. So the first point for me was to disclose, always disclosed. It was always my way of being able to embrace myself and say, this is me. But what then happened, Char, is that I then have to be my middle manager. I have to be the advocate for me. I have to advocate. I became advocate for other people who didn't feel they could disclose, which is fine, because then you become that community. But it was the fight of fighting. Just remember me. I've just had an interview. I need extra time just to tell my thought process. Remember me. I'm the person. Is there access to work? Remember, it becomes exhausting. And I've had to take regular breaks and decide, do I go for it or do I not? But all in all, to where I am now, if that helps to round it up, because I could write a book just on that, on terms of my, my journey in navigating the workplace, feeling like I belong, understanding cultures, from going to the pub or not going to the pub, do I fit in, if I wear my hair like that. Oh my gosh, Marcia, you've changed again. I couldn't recognize you. I could talk about all of that alongside my neurodiversity. That's part of diversity and being different, because those are so many different things, and that can be exhausted as well. But I've just had to be an advocate for myself, and I have to accept me first, and I have to do that. But sometimes I've masked because I just don't want to do it. I just don't want to be the person advocating for myself. If I'm honest, in my current job, I've had to support my manager to be able to help me with access to work. Sometimes you just want to sit back and be able to relax and be able to just be me. And I don't feel I've got to that point where I can just be me at the moment. I have to be me and be other roles within the workplace. I'm not saying that there isn't been some positive changes. I've got assistive technology, great, I've never had that before. That does aid me and as a reasonable adjustment. But there are other things that is just not understood. And I think what came up again in the chat is about psychological safe spaces, because sometimes if you haven't got the training and you're not training your middle managers to be able to support difference and how to deal with conflicts or misunderstandings, that can be tricky. So you don't feel safe to go to them. You know, I was bullied in the workplace and my manager said, well, I can't see it, so I can't help you. But you've got to, for me, it's not only me thinking it's not helping me, is it because I'm a Black woman? I'm questioning myself. That's not safe. I'm questioning myself. That makes me burn out because I don't know where that person's coming from. But all I do know, I know what I'm feeling. So it's so many different things, Char, but yes, I am getting some support, but yes, I've had to do some of that navigating to get the support. During lockdown, it took 6 months to get assistive technology because they wanted to redo the package, and there was no connection with the dots with IT. Listen, people in IT need to do some research and support as well, whether it's connected to HR or not HR. You know, there's some standard things, just like you should say, these are what we've got on offer for everyone. It doesn't have to be just for being people who are neurodiverse. So what free software, whether it's Microsoft that can do text to help, we can all benefit, if we want to use the word benefit, like I could benefit from a holiday, but you could all benefit from these resources regardless of your neurodiverse. But they're just things that we're not taking consideration. And as I said, the middle managers and top up, we need to be supporting them as well, because sometimes they don't know, and you don't know how to ask, how do you need support? So that's, I'll leave it there, but I think there needs to be more training and investment around that kind of work, because I'm not saying middle managers are at fault. If they don't know and they haven't been trained, how can they support to some extent? There's some things that feels common sense, but that's another topic altogether. But there is elements of training required, even to have a basic induction when you come into the work. It just feels like a tick box. This is disability, right? Okay. It needs to be ongoing. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to be, people can feel that there's a real mission and vision to really change the narrative. But I'm yet to see that. And there's some things I'm yet to see whether it'll be in my lifetime when we talk about diversity. But I feel like I'm going off again, but I hope you've got some essence and an element of where I'm coming from in the workplace. It's not all bad, but it's not all good.
No, we love it, Marcia. I mean, hang on, I've got some alliteration here, but your visibility and vulnerability is valuable. So thank you for so candidly sharing, you know, the good, the bad, the what can be better, the what's happened and what we want to be happening, because, you know, we don't often have the opportunity to take up space and to be heard. And I feel that everybody who's attending this webinar wants to listen and has a space to hear and to learn. And so thank you for being so candid. And Atif, I'm going to hand back over to you. Yeah, because I'm going to
say one thing as well. And I advocate and why I talk and why I'm here, because I know so many of people who are neurodiverse who are just not at that point to be able to feel they can feel safe to talk about it. And they're masking in lots of ways that's affecting their well-being. And I want to make change on that. And that's why we're here, to look at the corporate, how we can make these our places of work psychologically safe. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Atif, I will hand it back over to you. I know I've stolen the mic for a second, just out of curiosity and intrigue. But disclaimer: you're looking at an autistic, burnt out woman. You know, the team know that I was working super hard last night, so forgive me if I've rambled, but thank you for answering.
I want to say, can we all stop apologizing for our joys, our wonders? You know, we spent a lifetime doing that. I did it, as Marcia said, as a child. I didn't speak. So we don't need to do that. Whatever we say, it's all good to know. But I know look, there's years of that, of always sort of peeking into the room going, oh, maybe, but I honestly, it's hard. Words are clumsy, but you two are awesome. It's just amazing to share this space with you, and everybody listening. I'm going to check a question as well. Yeah, look, and there's a lot of conversations here about psychology of this as well, and participation, and it's true. And it's been said before, and it's a really lovely thing to say. But shame dies when it finds a safe place to tell a story. So it's our role to create these safe spaces. It's our roles to look at the spaces that weren't there for us. And it's our role to say, I'm not ready to do it today. It's okay for me not to do it today, because you know what? Today is not that day. And there's other days we can say, well, it's all good. I'm on it. We're in it. All of us are advocates. We're building this, right? And we're making this easier. So yeah, so it's all good. Before I go to the audience, Marcia, I wanted to ask you, do you have any questions that you want to ask of Char or myself?
I did have around belonging, but I think we've looked at that. And I've touched on tokenism, but that's something that still kind of resonates with me. But I'm going to go with, have you ever felt, either of you, visible but invisible? I think I really like that one, because I know I feel that sometimes and have felt that a lot. I just want to know, and it's the same question. So shall I go with you just because Atif's just spoken? I'm being fair.
Yeah, I think every day of my life up until I embraced each individual part of me, in some way I felt visible but invisible, because some people saw my blackness but would not see my queerness and would not accept it, and some people saw my religion but they wouldn't accept certain other elements of me. So because I want to be whole and I want to be authentic, and I want to say, hey, yeah, I'm black, mixed, and I'm a lesbian, I'm South Asian, I'm autistic, and all of that is me, and all of that's important. Unless people are willing to see all of that and embrace all of that, there's always a part of me that I feel is missing. So it's just kudos to spaces like this and places like this where they say, hey, bring all of you, bring all of your intersections with you, and we see all of them. But yeah, there has been so many times that I have felt that, and for me, that's why it's important to be visible. There's that old saying, you can't be what you don't see. And so
100%.
I hope that someone sees a black autistic, gender non-conforming lesbian out there and says, hey, my existence is valid too.
Thank you. I can breathe that in and breathe it out and just feel and hear that. And that is about that being that whole person, isn't it? And being authentic with it. No longer do I feel I'm quirky, which is what I used to say. I'm a bit quirky, a bit different. That is who I am. And I embrace that now. And actually, there's a lot of talent in that quirkiness, because I see things a little bit different. And we need that. It's good for business. So I'm going to ask the question to you about invisible and being invisible or invisible. What does that mean for you? You can see I'm even getting the words, because being neurodiverse, my words can be affected in my brain. I've got the words, but it just don't come out. So there we go. I hope you can capture that. If you want me to say it again, I'll read it.
No, I get it, and I get the sentiments of it. Yeah, I guess, look, yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's a constant work in progress. It doesn't have, so I've been part of 2 organizations and social enterprises that have been really successful, and I really love the stories behind that success and that challenge. But nevertheless, yeah, I'll still have a moment where I think, oh, I'll fly back to being that 12-year-old kid who struggles to speak or make eye contact. Even I didn't make eye contact with people till I was in my, I think, late 20s. And I remember working hard to do that, to learn to do that. And it's a way of wanting to be invisible, if I'm totally honest, rather than being invisible. But it also sometimes feels so far away from me now. Sometimes it feels so far away from, and then every so often something will happen there's a spreadsheet, I can't see the numbers that are wrong, or something will happen. I think, oh God. And that 13-year-old youngster in that estate comes back and goes, yeah, because you're not very good at this. And I think, okay, you go away for a bit. I'm not that great at it, but I'm good enough. And what I've got to figure out is, who do we work with to make sure we get this stuff right, you know, and make sure that we're more than good enough to get all the things that have come ahead of us, you know, that are going to come ahead of us, because we've shown it already, you know. And I think there's a testimony to that. So it's about choosing that, I suppose, and making sure. And sometimes we're so hard on ourselves, aren't we? We wouldn't speak to our children sometimes the way we speak to ourselves. We wouldn't talk to our colleagues or our friendships, you know. And so
Absolutely.
it's being aware of that, just feeling that, saying, how can I be kinder to myself in this space, you know? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things as well, just on that note, for everybody, we're not good at everything, but we're not reminded of that at the beginning of our journey from the school system, from my experience anyway. You're either bad at this or you're bad at that, but what are you good at? And sometimes you have to get people to help you in that support mechanism. If you're good at spreadsheets, if you can do the spreadsheets, great. So we're working together as a team, because that's how it works for me in my current role. I'm really good on the phones. My colleagues are good at bashing out an email. So we compromise, because I love being on the phone. I love communicating. I love speaking to people. It's about, you know, that's just me. So we compromise. So why can't we work with our strengths? And why can that be in the workplace as well? Why do you have to test people? You're not good at that. It still continues. And that's why we're talking about not always feeling good enough, or that was being some of our journey. And that needs to be changed in a way. We work towards our strengths. But again, that's another infrastructure and a way of thinking differently and coming away from this sort of outdated sort of workhouse kind of way of working, if that's okay to say that. But, you know, if we move away from that now and try to be that innovative and think differently and out of the box, a lot of us are here as neurodiverse, or, you know, we think like that. So let's bring that innovation and bring all of that to the party. You know, I don't want to feel invisible anymore. That's why I selectively muted. And then I had to be visible, because they were telling me I'm never going to achieve anything in my life. So I had to make a change. It was a make and break. Some people, they get broken by it. It takes a long time to come back. It just motivated me. So, you know, that's why I asked the question about that invisible, because that's what I thought was the plan. I'm going to be invisible. I'm going to not talk, and then people won't notice me. But that wasn't going to work. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to you, Atif, as we come to question and answers.
Yeah, well, actually, that brings it to a nice question that's in the audience, which is a question for all of us, really. Said what is there an aspect of your diversity and neurodiversity that you have come to celebrate? I think that's changing the gear as well, so that we have come to celebrate. And I'm going to ask, well, I'll ask Char, you first.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you, Ellie. When I was growing up, one of the things that I was really proud of, that I would tell people, is that nobody had ever seen me cry. And I used to think that that was really a powerful thing, that I could hide all my emotions and push them all to the bottom and always be big and strong and assertive, and nothing would ever upset me. And as I grew and matured, I realized how much of a blessing and how enriching being a sensitive person, being empathetic, feeling everything, and not being overwhelmed by feeling things, but cherishing the idea that some people are cold and don't care, and other people really care and they feel. And if I had to choose, if I wanted to be somebody who doesn't care and doesn't feel, or somebody who really does care and really does feel, then I would have chosen really caring and really feeling. So I think that's the one thing that I'm really proud of, and I celebrate now, is having empathy, caring about the world, caring about people, wanting to embrace people, and feeling everything, even if it's not a good feeling or a happy feeling, just embracing that I'm a feelings person. I declare myself an emotional being, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm going to always lead with that.
Yeah.
So that's me. That's what I'm celebrating.
Absolutely. How wonderfully said. Marcia, for you, is there a part you celebrate
I celebrate what Cher said, Cheryl said the same thing, the emotional intelligence that I have. I know people have said, you'd be really good as a leader because you've really got the emotional intelligence, you've got that empathy. I wonder from a neurodiversity perspective if that's a general trait. I don't know, but I've definitely had that all my life, even though culturally there was also the element of people pleasing, that you had to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to say thank you, you've got to say please. There was this whole manners stuff that goes on along with it. So it's in time, but I do think a lot of it is naturally me. But if there's anything else that I would say, I am a real ideas person. I like to create content. I like to create things I didn't know I could do before, but do now. And that's just something I embrace. And if I make a mistake, I just edit and come back and then come back. It's okay. And that's the other thing. It's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. That was never told to me. I had to learn that myself in my adulthood. It's okay. So now I embrace that because I have got creativity. Not every neurodiverse will say they're creative, but I definitely am. And I'm an ideas person. I love to see the whole picture. I love to see the whole production from the beginning, kind of, but I'm always at the end. I see the whole house, and then I have to go back and then build the foundation sometimes, but I've built it in my head. So all those things I embrace now and say, that's just me. But the emotional intelligence definitely is me as well, but I try to have something a bit different because that's also part of me that I now think is not quirky. I think it's actually a gift. Should I go with that, or a superpower maybe? But yeah, I can ask questions in the meeting and people think, oh my gosh, I'm okay with that now. It's not going to be a silly question.
Fantastic. I would go with, just briefly, sentiments of both what you've said. I generally feel like it's helped me see things and feel things, and it's kept me grounded. The humility is really important, and it's a constant work in progress, but I'm really glad that I can feel things that matter to people, mostly, not always, but mostly before they have to tell me. And I think that that's really important, and it should always be something that grounds anyone in leadership as well, and that's the responsibility I have. The second is, yeah, absolutely, I think I've been able to create 2 organizations, one in the West Bank of Palestine that the UN said couldn't happen, and I was part of a team and people who really drove something, and I think it was successful precisely because we could feel things and see things differently, rather than following maps and ideas that will just tell you this doesn't work. So I guess it's, from my sense, it's the innovation side of things. It's being able to feel things and see spaces where maps aren't already written for us and build them, and it's that gut instinct that really does sometimes help us thrive, providing we feel emotionally safe enough to trust it, and I think that's for everybody out there. Okay, so I'm going to hand to Dan for a moment just to see what questions Dan wants to pick from the audience. I'm conscious of time as well, but we've done fantastic. We haven't lost many folks, and that in itself is wonderful. I'm conscious that people are using a lunch hour, but we would be really good to touch on some of the questions being asked here, particularly some of the the ones that we may not have touched enough in the conversation, although I think it's probably a lot of space we have covered. But let's see, Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, I'd echo what you've said. Really enjoyed the discussion today, and I've learned a lot from you 3 personally. I think a fair number of these questions have been covered because you've been really comprehensive. So I'll just pick out maybe 3, if that's okay, and we'll see what everyone thinks about them. So the first question that drew my eye really was, by 2025, we plan to increase representation by 20%. So that is some of what organisations put out there in terms of a neurodiversity at work strategy. And the commenter says, what they often says is that if this is an organisation's starting point, if they think that they can hire this way out of the challenges without looking at the systems and the structures. So it's more an observation, I think, than a kind of question, but just interested in what you think around those quantified targets. And gosh, what is representation? It's, how do we define it?
I'm going to dodge this question because, as you can see, it's giving me a pain in the neck. When that saying, oh, this is a real pain in the neck, I physically am feeling it, somatically talking to me. So I think, Marcia, I think you know exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're ready to speak, Atif, but so you go for it enough. Yeah,
please, Marcia, you.
Well, we're focusing on the stats, and this seems to be what some organisations do, but it's not even about the stats. You can have the stats all day long, but it is about those processes, those infrastructures that need to be sort of examined annually, not even annually, review. There's a whole range of things that needs to happen. And if we just look at the stats as that output of representation, and that by just changing the recruitment, we're going to have some black staff, that's not going to work. So that's just one take on it, but maybe I might be going off there. So, and I'm not trying to make excuses for it, but that's my thought process, that if we start just looking at stats, we're going to be sort of lining our recruitment. That's not going to work, because you remember what I said at the beginning, we need to do the inner work. And if we can't do that, but we're doing the tick boxes and we're just looking at the stats, do we ever look at the exit interviews of people leaving? Do we ever monitor that and look and question what's happening and why people are leaving, and good people with talent? And we're losing people like that. What have we looked at those kind of exits kind of conversations, and who's looking at it if they are? And it shouldn't just be a HR job. HR are HR, but they're not the expert in everything. And so we do have to, as I said before, invest. And sometimes there may not need to be a budget for that. You need to just do it as I'll stop there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, thanks, Aidan, for asking the question. It's kind of I think it speaks to the heart of this conversation, really, in some ways, because who are we talking about? So when we say, look, we plan to increase representation by 20%, well, okay, but then what does that mean? Does that mean that you 20% more are going to share and disclose? Okay, well, I guess that if you've made the safety and the space and the invitation, then that's actually a good thing. But then the conversation then again is, but unless we address those who get to safely participate and feel safe right from the beginning, then we're not going to get there. The true impact is about how do we make inclusive environments, rather than who chooses to disclose and who doesn't, or share, which is probably more important to talk about. Sometimes an organization will see people sharing because KPIs are not doing so well, or key performances, or report writing and stuff like that. Then you start looking at that someone will come forward to try and get a diagnosis and such. But as I said earlier, that can then become a mental health trigger for a number of reasons, because it's about job protection. Who doesn't have a job protection concern in their life that isn't also having a mental health concern in their life, especially in a troubling economy? So the conversation really is about, why do people share? And what is it that their motivation is? And who are the people coming forward? When we talk about lots of women in the workplace, well, which women? What are the stories behind women? When we talk about Black people, again, if you haven't got a conversation about class and participation and migration, then you haven't really got a conversation about Black people either. You've just got a conversation about some Black people. So it's about understanding how we do that deep dive. So I don't think it's a bad thing to look at representation at all. I think it's a good thing. I'm more excited about, what does an inclusive workplaces look like where you participate without having to have a diagnosis or needing to feel safe or unsafe because of one.
Is representation also like an output or something? So I don't know, but yeah, I think you've covered some things anyway. So yeah, there's a lot to when you're talking about.
Dan, another question?
Thank you. So I'm also going to ask our technology team to allow people to come off mute at this point, because no one wants to hear me speak and parrot someone else's question. So if there are questions that people want to verbalise, you're welcome to raise your hand at this point, and then you will be brought off mute by our tech team. Whilst we're sorting that out briefly, I will just read off another question, which I thought was really interesting, and it came from Holly. So how can we encourage people to disclose, given that candidates will feel they're either going to be judged or disadvantaged and thus feel scared to disclose? And what different language can we use to help them through that process?
I'm just going to quickly come in here, right? Personally, from my own lived experience, and as you know, we can't all speak from everybody who's neurodiverse. Everybody's coming, we've talked about the intersection and we come from different experience environments, etc. But for me, some of the things that I feel need to change is from the onboarding, even before the interview stage, to how we advertise and market. all those kind of things. It's got to be intentional, and yeah, it's just sometimes it's just not there in terms of how you are recruited and promoted, and then when that person's there, what are the support mechanisms, which they don't even have to speak. This is for everybody, right? So these are what's available. These are the things that we do. These are the things that we're passionate about. This is part of our vision, our ethos, our culture. This is where we need to be doing some of that work. And that's the investment, to do some of those work, unpick it from leadership down. We all need to be talking about it, but leadership in particular. But for me, some of my experiences in terms of going into new cultures and workplaces is the onboarding. It's me starting to do the work again. I'm doing the work. I'm trying to find out, what do we have? What don't we have? How do I fit in? That should be part of the process. I found induction, I don't even know if there's still handbooks. I don't know, but yeah, that's some of my experiences and some of the things that I've been in, you know, people spoke to me and shared with me, where and then all we do is get a performance review because they didn't know what was what, and they didn't feel they could ask, because they didn't feel the information was there, and they didn't feel they felt safe to say anything because they didn't feel it would fit, or you're going to have occupational health on your hands. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you capture some of the bits I'm saying.
Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly say on the back of that, that one of the barriers that I felt to employment when I was searching at that stage of my career was filling in forms and there not being another option without me having to find that other option. So I think if we can give options and choice and say, would you like to do this, this or this? And, you know, having people not have to ask the question, providing the solution, making sure that's already available, so it doesn't feel like you're doing something different. It just feels as though, hey, look at this organization that's got everything covered and I'm going to be safe here. So I think from the get-go, making that initial interaction safe.
Thank you. Atif, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, again, I guess it's really, I mean, both Marcia and Charles really covered this really well. It is being cognizant of what is, well, if we're going to use stats, for example, we're going to use these questions, what questions we're asking of people. Yeah, I'm interested in, of course, like look at the DNA team is a team that's designed to help workplaces discuss these things early, to anticipate them, to welcome them. But likewise, we are able to do this because we're made up of these lived experiences. It teaches us something. You know, 68% of the team will be disabled or neurodiverse. But more importantly, it's the percentage of how many went to university for the first time in their family. They're the first of their family. What's important is, are people that had free school meals. You know, these are the things that make every difference about what participation and safety they have and what kind of questions an organization is asking. Otherwise, we're going to go down a kind of performance path of prove you're a good version of an autism, prove you're a right dyslexic versus those who aren't the right one because they don't have the diagnosis. So it's really registering what is the impact and the safety that you're providing here, and what is the impact of people not coming forward to talk about needs.
I've just put in the chat some links for achievability. I don't know if anyone's heard of the WAC report, and they've got some little bits around neurodiversity in the workplace. And they've also put a recent report, some research that I was honoured to be part of, actually, called the Homecoming Programme. And you can download the report. It's about Black neurodiverse people within Lambeth working or living in Lambeth, about their experience as Black employees. So you can download that, they're free. So it's just, those could be some resources. I'm sure Dan's got some other things that maybe, you know, or I can share them that way as well with you, Dan. But I'm just sharing these bits in the chat, so you've got those as well. Even the civil service guide for middle management's toolkit, they're really just handy to have a look at, and things like that should be in your HR, or, you know, access to these files, not just sort of dug somewhere deep in a file, but accessible on your Moodles or whatever intranets you have, to make it accessible, which is what we're talking about as well, that things are there for people so they don't feel alienated or isolated, that there are things. But as I said, it should be part of the normal conversation when you onboard. That's simply my thoughts. Thank you.
So just to add to that, just that there is such a good example of some really good organizations out there that are amplifying the strengths of lived experiences, that are challenging a deficit model, that are really reinforcing cultures of sense of inclusion, that are about celebration and strength building rather than problematization cultures and compliance. And often compliance, you know, sadly, I mean, it means you don't get sued, but it doesn't mean you include, you know, and you can cover your back for it as organizations, which are obviously, but it's a baseline. It's not something progressive. It's not something that's inviting people. So it's looking at organizations taking a deep breath, saying, what are they missing in terms of talent and difference and innovation because they're not excited about how people participate enough? What can they do to move it away from problematization into excitement and difference?
Great. Okay. Well, look, I think we've had an fantastic session today. I personally have learned a lot from everyone, and I just want to express, you know, our membership, NIB's membership appreciation for everyone's time on the panelists here. You know, everyone's given their time freely, no doubt soaked up the lunch hour, which would have gone down well elsewhere. And I guess from a concluding point of view, we with NIB are not the experts in this topic, but we want to amplify the voices of others here. So I'd encourage you to reach out to Atif, Char or Marcia on any of these topics. They're very visible out there on social media, and you can see how to contact them. They might have even put their details in the chat window. So do reach out. Let's continue this dialogue. And I guess a final question to the panelists for me is that I've learned so much on this, but I equally recognise we're very early on in this stage of journey. I just wondered if I could ask you kindly, in a few months, would you come back again and we can delve into this topic with a slightly different angle and maybe in more detail? Would you be happy to do that?
Yeah.
Absolutely happy to.
Excellent. Great. Okay, everyone, have a lovely rest of the afternoon. Enjoy your next 8 minutes before your 1:30 meeting, perhaps. Have a sandwich, and everyone at NIB appreciates your support. Take care.
Thanks for listening, everybody.